Alicia Johnson was the kind of student who didn't demand attention. She was quiet, thoughtful, and went about her day without causing any trouble. She sat in the middle row, neither at the front nor at the back of the class, just in the spot where she wouldn't stand out. She was bright, with a mind full of dreams and ambitions, but she didn't feel the need to shout them from the rooftops. She was content to keep her thoughts to herself, quietly working toward her goals with a determination that others might not notice. Alicia's days often looked the same. She walked into her classroom, sat down with her books, and listened closely to every lesson. She completed her assignments on time, always careful and thorough in her work. She was the type of student who teachers often said had potential, but rarely seemed to acknowledge beyond her grades. She didn't mind, though. Alicia knew who she was and where she wanted to go, even if others didn't see it yet. She didn't need praise. She just needed the opportunity to do her best. However, not everyone was oblivious to Alicia. There was one person who had taken a particular interest in her, and not the good kind. Ms. Williams, Alicia's teacher, had been watching her closely. To most of the students, Ms. Williams seemed like any other teacher. She was strict, perhaps a bit too serious, but generally she seemed like she was just doing her job. But to Alicia, Ms. Williams was more than just strict. Ms. Williams had a sharpness in her eyes whenever she looked at Alicia, an expression that made Alicia feel like she was somehow a problem, like her very presence was bothersome. Ms. Williams was the kind of teacher who seemed to divide her class into two groups, those she liked and those she didn't. The students she liked would often get smiles, kind words, and sometimes even little compliments on their work. Alicia noticed these moments, even if she didn't say anything. But then there were students like her, the ones Ms. Williams seemed to disapprove of for reasons that were unclear. These students didn't get smiles or kind words. Instead, they received sharp looks, criticism, and sometimes outright dismissive comments. For Alicia, this experience was strange and uncomfortable. She wasn't used to being the center of attention in any way, but Ms. Williams had a way of making her feel like she was constantly under a spotlight, one that showed every flaw and none of her strengths. Alicia would sit in her seat, focusing on her work, but she could feel Ms. Williams' gaze from across the room, like a weight pressing down on her. It wasn't something she could quite explain to others. It was just a feeling that made her stomach twist whenever Ms. Williams was near. Despite all this, Alicia did her best to ignore Ms. Williams' harsh attention. She thought that if she just kept her head down and focused on her work, maybe Ms. Williams would eventually stop noticing her. But Ms. Williams didn't stop. In fact, as time went on, it felt like she was finding new ways to make Alicia uncomfortable. It started with small things at first. Ms. Williams would walk by Alicia's desk and comment on her handwriting, saying it was too messy even though Alicia's writing was neat and legible. She would find minor errors in Alicia's work and make them seem like huge mistakes, giving her lower grades than her work deserved. Alicia knew her work was good. She spent hours each night studying and completing her assignments with care. But no matter how hard she tried, Ms. Williams would always find something wrong. Sometimes, Ms. Williams would even call on Alicia in front of the class, asking her questions with a tone that made it clear she expected Alicia to get them wrong. Alicia would answer as best as she could, but she could feel her teacher's eyes watching, waiting for a mistake. The other students would shift in their seats, sensing the tension, and Alicia could feel the embarrassment creeping up her neck, making her face flush. It didn't matter if she got the answer right or wrong. Ms. Williams would respond with a slight smirk, as if to say, "I knew you didn't belong here." Alicia didn't understand why Ms. Williams seemed to dislike her so much. She had never been rude to her teacher, never talked back, or caused trouble in class. In fact, Alicia went out of her way to be respectful. She greeted Ms. Williams every morning with a quiet "good morning," and made sure to say thank you whenever her teacher handed back her assignments. But none of this seemed to make a difference. One day, Ms. Williams took her behavior a step further. She had assigned a group project, And Alicia was excited because group projects meant she could work with her friends, who always made her feel comfortable and supported. But when the time came to assign groups, Ms. Williams placed Alicia with students she barely knew. They were nice enough, but they weren't her friends. Alicia knew this was a way to isolate her, to take away the little comfort she had in the classroom. As they worked on the project, Alicia did her best to contribute, but every time Ms. Williams checked on their progress, she would make little comments aimed at Alicia. "Are you sure you're doing that correctly?" she would ask, with a raised eyebrow that made Alicia's heart sink. She would point out things that weren't mistakes, just to make Alicia feel inadequate in front of her peers. Alicia felt trapped. She loved learning, and she loved her school, but Ms. Williams was turning her days into something she dreaded. Each morning, she would walk to school with a heavy feeling in her chest, wondering what Ms. Williams would do next. She didn't understand why her teacher was treating her this way. All she wanted was to be treated like everyone else, to be given the same opportunities and respect. One afternoon, Ms. Williams decided to give a pop quiz. Alicia had studied the material thoroughly, so she felt confident she would do well. She finished her quiz early, double-checking her answers before quietly setting her pencil down. But when Ms. Williams walked by to collect the papers, she stopped at Alicia's desk and picked up her quiz with a frown. "This is sloppy work, Alicia," Ms. Williams said, loud enough for the entire class to hear. Alicia's face flushed with embarrassment as her classmates glanced over. She had checked her answers carefully. She knew they were correct. But Ms. Williams looked at her as if she had done something wrong, as if she were disappointed in her. Alicia wanted to speak up, to say something, anything, to defend herself. But her voice felt stuck in her throat, trapped by the weight of Ms. Williams' judgment. Instead, she looked down at her desk, trying to ignore the way her heart was pounding. She didn't want to let Ms. Williams see her cry. As the days turned into weeks, the pattern continued. Ms. Williams seemed to make it her mission to find every possible flaw in Alicia, to point out every tiny mistake, whether it was real or imagined. Alicia did her best to stay strong, to remind herself that she was smart and capable, but it was becoming harder and harder to believe that. Every time Ms. Williams looked at her with that critical expression, Alicia felt a part of her confidence fade away. What Alicia didn't realize, though, was that her quiet strength was beginning to show, even if she didn't feel it herself. Her friends noticed how she handled Ms. Williams' criticism with dignity, never lashing out or complaining. They admired her resilience, even if they didn't always understand why Ms. Williams was treating her so unfairly. Some of them tried to encourage her, to remind her of her strengths, but Alicia often just smiled and shrugged, not wanting to burden anyone with her troubles. In those moments, though, a spark of something new began to grow within her. It wasn't anger or resentment, but a quiet determination to prove herself, not just to Ms. Williams, but to herself. She knew she couldn't change her teacher's mind, but she could control how she responded. Ms. Williams had a particular way of treating Alicia that made her feel small, like she was less than the other students in the class. Alicia couldn't understand why, but every time Ms. Williams spoke to her, it was in a tone that was both sharp and dismissive, as if she'd already decided that Alicia didn't belong there. While other students received words of encouragement, Alicia was met with sly remarks disguised as advice and backhanded compliments that left her feeling unsure and discouraged. But still, Alicia held her head high, determined not to let Ms. Williams see how much it hurt. Ms. Williams had her own way of teaching Alicia lessons, but they weren't the kind that came from books. Whenever Alicia raised her hand to answer a question, Ms. Williams would pause, look around the room, and then sigh, as if asking Alicia to speak was the last thing she wanted to do. She'd call on Alicia, but not with the excitement or curiosity she showed for other students. Instead, it was with a look of doubt, as if she already knew Alicia would get it wrong. And even when Alicia gave the correct answer, Ms. Williams would respond with a tone that took the excitement out of learning. "Are you sure that's right, Alicia?" Ms. Williams would ask, her eyebrow raised in a way that made Alicia second-guess herself, even when she knew she was correct. "Yes, Ms. Williams." "I'm sure," Alicia would reply, trying to sound confident, even though her voice would sometimes tremble just a bit. Ms. Williams would stare at her for a moment longer than necessary, making Alicia feel like she was being judged for daring to answer at all. And then Ms. Williams would move on to another student, as if Alicia's answer hadn't even mattered. Over time, Ms. Williams' comments became even harsher. She didn't hide her condescension, often making remarks that Alicia knew were aimed directly at her, even if they were disguised as advice. One day, during a class discussion, Ms. Williams looked directly at Alicia and said, "Some people need to work twice as hard to get even half as far. You should remember that, Alicia." She said it with a smirk, as if she thought Alicia wasn't good enough and never would be. The comment stung, but Alicia refused to let it show. She knew Ms. Williams was waiting for a reaction, waiting for her to break down or lash out. But Alicia wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, she clenched her fists under the desk, took a deep breath, and focused on keeping her head high. She was determined to show Ms. Williams that no matter what she said or did, Alicia wouldn't let her words define her. As the days went by, Ms. Williams continued her campaign of subtle insults and outright disrespect. She would assign Alicia the hardest tasks in group projects, giving her extra work without explanation. If Alicia asked for clarification, Ms. Williams would act annoyed, as if her questions were a burden. "Figure it out yourself, Alicia," she'd say, her tone dripping with impatience. "After all, you said you were capable, didn't you?" Alicia would nod, swallowing the lump in her throat, and try her best to figure it out. She didn't want to give Ms. Williams any reason to think she couldn't handle it. Even when the assignments felt impossible, she pushed herself, staying up late to make sure every detail was perfect. She poured everything she had into her work, hoping that maybe, just maybe, Ms. Williams would notice and offer a word of praise. But that praise never came. Instead, Ms. Williams found new ways to make Alicia feel inferior. One afternoon, Ms. Williams decided to review everyone's homework in front of the class. She picked up Alicia's paper, holding it up for everyone to see. Alicia felt her heart race, hoping that maybe, just this once, Ms. Williams might acknowledge her hard work. But instead, Ms. Williams sneered, pointing out the smallest error with a voice full of disdain. "Look at this," she said, tapping her finger on Alicia's paper. "This is what happens when people don't put in the effort. Sloppy work, Alicia. Really sloppy." Alicia felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as her classmates looked at her, some with sympathy, others with discomfort. She had worked so hard on that assignment, staying up late to make sure every answer was correct. But none of that mattered to Ms. Williams. She only saw what she wanted to see, and what she wanted was to make Alicia feel unworthy. It didn't end there. Ms. Williams started finding more and more reasons to call Alicia out in front of the class, pointing out minor mistakes as if they were major flaws. If Alicia's handwriting was a bit uneven, Ms. Williams would hold it up as an example of what not to do. If she answered a question a little hesitantly, Ms. Williams would shake her head, sighing dramatically as if Alicia's presence in her class was a disappointment. The other students noticed too. They could see that Ms. Williams treated Alicia differently, and some of them tried to offer support in quiet ways. A kind smile, a whispered word of encouragement. But others followed Ms. Williams' lead, starting to view Alicia as the lesser student, someone who was struggling to keep up. Alicia could feel their eyes on her, could sense the whispers and the snickers, and it only made her feel more alone. But no matter how harshly Ms. Williams treated her, Alicia refused to let it break her spirit. She kept telling herself that one day she would prove her worth. She would show Ms. Williams and everyone else that she was capable and intelligent. She would rise above the insults, the humiliation, and the unfair treatment. She didn't know when or how, but deep down, she believed that her time would come. One day, during a class presentation, Ms. Williams' behavior reached a new level of cruelty. Each student was supposed to present a project they have been working on for weeks. Alicia had put her heart and soul into her project, staying up late to make sure every detail was perfect. She practiced her presentation over and over, hoping to impress the class, and maybe even gain a bit of respect from Ms. Williams. When it was finally her turn, Alicia stood up, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. She began her presentation, speaking clearly and confidently, proud of the work she had done. But as she spoke, she noticed Ms. Williams watching her with that familiar look of disdain. It made her stomach twist, but she pressed on, determined to finish strong. As Alicia wrapped up her presentation, she looked to Ms. Williams, hoping for some sign of approval. But instead, Ms. Williams gave her a dismissive look and said, "That was acceptable, I suppose. But really, Alicia, I expected more effort from you. This seems a bit basic, don't you think?" Alicia felt a lump in her throat, her pride deflating in an instant. She had worked so hard, and yet Ms. Williams made her feel like it was worthless, like she was just going through the motions. She wanted to defend herself, to explain the hours she had spent perfecting every detail. But she knew it would make no difference to Ms. Williams, who had already made up her mind. Alicia returned to her seat, her classmates looking at her with pity and discomfort. Some of them tried to offer encouraging smiles, but the damage had been done. Ms. Williams had made sure of that. But despite all the pain, Alicia knew one thing. She wouldn't let Ms. Williams define her. She wouldn't let this teacher's unfair treatment dictate how she felt about herself. Alicia knew she was capable, even if Ms. Williams refused to see it. And deep inside, a quiet resilience grew, a determination that no amount of criticism could erase. As she sat in her seat, her face calm but her heart resolute, Alicia made a promise to herself. She would not let Ms. Williams' prejudice and arrogance break her. She would work harder, push further, and someday, she would prove that she was more than the labels Ms. Williams had tried to place on her. Day after day, Alicia sat in her seat, trying her best to focus on her studies and not on the harsh words Ms. Williams threw her way. Every insult, every critical remark, was like a small weight pressing down on her shoulders, but Alicia was careful not to let it show. She knew Ms. Williams was watching, waiting for her to break down or lash out, but Alicia was determined to stay calm. She wouldn't give Ms. Williams the satisfaction of seeing her affected. It wasn't easy, though. Alicia's days in the classroom felt longer and heavier than ever before. Each morning, she would walk into class, knowing that Ms. Williams would find some way to make her feel inadequate. Ms. Williams was crafty, hiding her insults in small comments that seemed harmless to others. "Is this the best you can do, Alicia?" she'd say, glancing at Alicia's work with a slight frown. "I expected better." These words, though quiet, echoed loudly in Alicia's mind, and she felt the sting of Ms. Williams' judgment in every glance, every smirk. At first, Alicia had tried to brush off Ms. Williams' behavior, telling herself that it didn't matter what one person thought. But as time went on, she began to notice a pattern. Ms. Williams wasn't just picking on her at random. There was a consistency to her comments, a focus on making Alicia feel like she was never enough. And with each remark, Alicia felt her resolve grow stronger. She knew she couldn't confront Ms. Williams outright. It would only make things worse. But she wasn't completely powerless either. She could endure, watch, and wait. As the days passed, Alicia began to observe Ms. Williams more closely, noticing small details that others might overlook. She started to see that Ms. Williams had her own habits, routines, and even vulnerabilities. Every day, Ms. Williams would arrive exactly 5 minutes before the bell, always carrying a steaming cup of coffee in her right hand and her worn leather bag in her left. Alicia noticed that Ms. Williams had a way of glancing around the room with a cold, calculating expression, as if sizing up each student and deciding who deserved her attention and who didn't. Alicia also noticed how Ms. Williams seemed to favor certain students, offering them praise and encouragement even for minor achievements, while others, like Alicia, received only criticism. There was a pattern to her favoritism, and Alicia could see it clearly. The students who got along with Ms. Williams, who laughed at her jokes and complimented her, were treated kindly. But those who were quiet, those who didn't play along with her game, were often ignored or criticized. This observation gave Alicia a strange sense of power. She realized that Ms. Williams wasn't as fair or impartial as she pretended to be. In fact, Ms. Williams' attitude was more about control and ego than it was about helping her students learn. Alicia kept these thoughts to herself, holding them close as she continued to endure Ms. Williams' behavior in silence. Each day, she absorbed the insults, nodding quietly and keeping her face calm. But inside, she was collecting each piece of evidence, building a mental picture of who Ms. Williams really was. One day, during a group discussion, Ms. Williams called on Alicia to explain a complex topic they had just covered. Alicia was prepared. She had studied hard the night before, knowing that Ms. Williams would likely call on her to test her knowledge. She began to explain the topic, speaking clearly and confidently, hoping that this time her efforts would be acknowledged. But as she spoke, she saw Ms. Williams smirk, the slight curl of her lips that said, "I'm waiting for you to make a mistake." Alicia finished her explanation, feeling the surge of pride. She knew she had done well. But Ms. Williams wasn't satisfied. She raised an eyebrow, pausing for a moment before responding. "Well, that was interesting, Alicia, but I think you missed some important points. Next time, try to prepare a bit more thoroughly." Her words hung in the air, and Alicia felt the familiar sting of disappointment. But this time, Alicia didn't let it show. She looked directly at Ms. Williams, her gaze steady and unblinking. She didn't respond or offer any excuse. She simply nodded, acknowledging the comment without letting it break her spirit. Inside, though, she was making a mental note. She knew she had answered correctly, and she knew that Ms. Williams' criticism had more to do with her own need to feel superior than with Alicia's actual performance. Over time, Alicia started noticing other small things about Ms. Williams that made her behavior seem less intimidating. She realized that Ms. Williams had a habit of criticizing others to make herself feel important, and this pattern wasn't limited to Alicia. Whenever a student showed potential, Ms. Williams would find ways to downplay their efforts, subtly suggesting that they would never be good enough. It was as if Ms. Williams couldn't stand to see others succeed, especially those she deemed unworthy. Alicia also noticed that Ms. Williams had a certain look she would give whenever someone challenged her authority. It was a quick flash of annoyance, a tightening around her eyes, followed by a calm but icy stare. Alicia made a note of this, realizing that Ms. Williams' confidence wasn't as solid as she tried to make it appear. There were cracks in her facade, tiny signs that hinted at insecurities hidden beneath her strict exterior. Each day, as Alicia endured Ms. Williams' comments, she found herself growing stronger, her mind sharper. She didn't just sit quietly anymore. She observed, she remembered, and she began to piece together a plan. She knew she couldn't confront Ms. Williams openly. It would only lead to more mistreatment. But if she could gather enough evidence, if she could show others what she had seen, then maybe, just maybe, people would start to understand. One afternoon, Ms. Williams handed back an assignment, placing Alicia's paper on her desk with a slight sneer. "This isn't your best work, Alicia," she said, her voice laced with disappointment. Alicia looked down at her paper, noticing the harsh red marks that covered her answers. She had spent hours on this assignment, double-checking every detail, but Ms. Williams had found faults in every part of it. Alicia felt a wave of frustration, but she took a deep breath and forced herself to stay calm. She knew this was part of Ms. Williams' plan, a way to keep her feeling small and uncertain. But instead of letting it affect her, Alicia began to see it as another piece of the puzzle. She started saving her assignments, keeping each one in a neat folder. Each paper, with its unfairly low marks and condescending comments, became part of her silent collection, evidence of the bias she endured each day. As weeks turned into months, Alicia's folder grew thicker, filled with assignments and notes that showed a clear pattern. She had made up her mind. She would not confront Ms. Williams head-on, but she would be ready. If the day ever came when she could reveal the truth, she would have everything she needed to make her case. In the meantime, Alicia continued to observe Ms. Williams closely, noting every slip, every moment of unkindness. She started paying attention to how Ms. Williams treated other students, noticing that the teacher often showed the same behavior toward others who didn't fit her idea of acceptable. It became clear to Alicia that Ms. Williams' attitude wasn't just about her. It was a reflection of the teacher's own need for control and superiority. Alicia's quiet strength became her armor. She learned to let Ms. Williams' words wash over her, never giving her the reaction she seemed to want. With each passing day, Alicia felt her resolve grow stronger, her sense of purpose sharper. She knew that someday she would find a way to make her voice heard. And until that day came, she would continue to endure, watching, waiting, and building her case piece by piece. Little did Ms. Williams know her attempts to belittle Alicia were only fueling her determination. The day Alicia had been quietly waiting for finally arrived. After months of enduring Ms. Williams' constant belittling remarks, unfair treatment, and hidden insults, Alicia had reached a point where she could no longer stand by silently. She had spent all this time gathering her strength, observing, and preparing for the right moment to take a stand. And now, as she sat in class, she could feel that moment approaching. It was an ordinary day, or at least it seemed so to everyone else. Ms. Williams entered the classroom with her usual brisk steps, her coffee in one hand, her leather bag in the other, and that familiar look of superiority on her face. She scanned the classroom, her eyes briefly resting on Alicia, and Alicia felt a surge of calm confidence within her. Today, she would not look down. Today, she would meet Ms. Williams' gaze head-on. Ms. Williams began the class, discussing an upcoming assignment. As she spoke, she seemed to be in one of her moods, extra critical and watchful, as if waiting for someone to slip up. Alicia could feel the tension in the room, her classmates sitting up straighter, trying to avoid drawing attention to themselves. But Alicia remained calm, her focus unwavering. She was ready. After finishing her lecture, Ms. Williams started returning the students' latest tests. She walked down each row, handing back papers with little comments here and there, some students receiving a rare smile, others a nod. When she reached Alicia's desk, she paused, looking down at her with that familiar frown. "I expected more from you, Alicia," she said, her voice carrying a hint of mock disappointment. "This is not up to the standards I expect from my students." Alicia took her paper, glancing at the red marks scattered across the page. She had prepared thoroughly for this test, spending hours studying, and she knew her answers were correct. Ms. Williams had marked down points for things that seemed trivial, even nonsensical, and Alicia knew it wasn't about her work. It was about her. But instead of letting the criticism sting, she looked up at Ms. Williams, her expression calm and steady. "Ms. Williams," Alicia said, her voice clear but respectful, "I would like to talk about my grade, if that's all right." The class went silent, and all eyes turned to Alicia. Ms. Williams raised an eyebrow, clearly not used to being questioned, especially not by Alicia. She glanced around the room, perhaps expecting Alicia to back down under her stare, but Alicia didn't waver. "Very well, Alicia," Ms. Williams replied, her voice dripping with impatience. "If you have questions, feel free to ask. But I must warn you, questioning my grading will not change your results." Alicia took a deep breath, feeling the strength she had been building for so long finally rise to the surface. "It's not just this grade, Ms. Williams," she began, her voice calm but firm. "I've noticed a pattern in how you've graded my work, and I believe it's something we need to discuss. This isn't about one test or one assignment. It's about fairness, respect, and the way you treat me and some of my classmates." Ms. Williams' expression froze, her smirk disappearing as a hush fell over the room. The other students sat in stunned silence, their eyes wide as they watched Alicia, who had always been so quiet, now standing up and speaking with a confidence that none of them had seen before. Alicia continued, her gaze never leaving Ms. Williams. "I have worked hard in this class, just like everyone else, but I have often felt singled out. You've made comments that make me feel like I'm not welcome here, and I believe that's unfair. I know I'm not the only student who feels this way, but today, I'm speaking for myself." Ms. Williams' face turned pale, her composure slipping. She tried to interrupt, but Alicia held up her hand respectfully, indicating that she wasn't finished. Ms. Williams' mouth opened slightly, but for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. The usual confidence, the control she wielded over the class, was slipping away, and everyone could see it. "Every time I make a small mistake, it feels like it's turned into a huge issue, while others are forgiven for similar mistakes," Alicia said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I get something right, it's brushed off or criticized in a way that doesn't seem fair. I've collected every assignment you've given me, with every comment and grade you've marked. I can show that the criticism I've received is not balanced compared to others." At this, Ms. Williams' face flushed, a mixture of shock and anger flickering in her eyes. "Alicia," she began, her voice quivering slightly, "I am simply doing my job. Perhaps you need to learn how to handle constructive criticism." Alicia didn't flinch. She met Ms. Williams' gaze, her own expression calm and unwavering. "I understand constructive criticism, Ms. Williams," she replied, her tone respectful but strong. "And I welcome it when it's fair. But when it's biased, when it's aimed to make someone feel less instead of helping them improve, it stops being constructive. It becomes harmful." The room was silent, every student hanging on Alicia's words. They had all seen the way Ms. Williams treated her, and some had experienced it themselves, but none had dared to speak up. Yet here was Alicia, who had quietly endured so much, now standing in front of them with a quiet power that demanded respect. Alicia continued, her voice steady and measured. "I've stayed up late, put in extra hours, and given my best in this class, just as you ask of every student. But it feels like my efforts are never good enough for you, not because of my work, but because of something else. I think that's unfair, and I believe every student deserves to be treated with respect." The look on Ms. Williams' face changed from shock to defensiveness. "Alicia, that's enough," she snapped, her voice unsteady, betraying the loss of control she so carefully guarded. But Alicia stood her ground, refusing to let her voice be silenced. "I think it's important for teachers to treat every student equally, with fairness," Alicia continued, her voice ringing through the room. "We're all here to learn, to grow, and to become better. But how can we do that if we're made to feel like we're less than others?" A few students in the back began to murmur, nodding in agreement. They had seen the same things Alicia was describing. The subtle bias, the favoritism, the dismissive comments. One by one, they began to look at Ms. Williams with questioning eyes, no longer seeing her as the unquestionable authority figure they had once thought. Ms. Williams, sensing the shift in the room, tried to regain control. "Class, this is highly inappropriate," she said, her voice trembling. "I am your teacher, and I expect respect." Alicia looked around at her classmates, feeling a sense of solidarity and strength. She had spoken her truth, and she could see that her words had resonated with others. She turned back to Ms. Williams, her gaze calm and unwavering. "Respect is a two-way street, Ms. Williams," she said quietly. "It's something we all deserve, including students. I've shown you respect every day, despite the way you've treated me. And today, I'm asking for the same respect in return." Ms. Williams opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. For the first time, she seemed at a loss, her usual confidence shattered by Alicia's quiet, undeniable truth. She glanced around the room, seeing the expressions of her students, expressions that reflected their agreement with Alicia, their disappointment in their teacher. The principal, who happened to be passing by, had heard the commotion and stepped into the classroom, observing the scene with a stern expression. After listening to Alicia's calm yet powerful words and seeing the impact they had on the class, the principal looked at Ms. Williams with a serious gaze. "Alicia, thank you for speaking up," the principal said, addressing the class as well. "Every student has the right to a fair and supportive learning environment, and it's clear that some important conversations need to happen. Ms. Williams, I'd like to speak with you after class." Ms. Williams, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly, nodded, her usual air of authority completely absent. Alicia's classmates watched in silence, some of them looking at Alicia with newfound admiration, others smiling softly, their own feelings of discomfort with Ms. Williams now validated. As the class came to an end, Alicia gathered her things, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She hadn't expected to feel so free, so strong. She had finally stood up for herself, and, in doing so, had shown her classmates that they too could speak out against unfair treatment. The quiet, resilient Alicia who had once been overlooked was no longer invisible. She had proven her strength, her determination, and her belief in fairness and respect. And as she left the classroom, she knew that things would never be the same again. News of what happened in Ms. Williams' classroom spread quickly through the school. By the end of the day, nearly every student, teacher, and even some parents had heard about Alicia's courageous stand. People whispered in hallways, students shared the story with their friends, and some teachers exchanged worried glances, wondering if there was more going on in their classrooms than they knew. The principal didn't waste any time addressing the situation. The very next morning, Ms. Williams was called into a meeting with the principal and a few members of the school administration. She had tried to brush off Alicia's words as an exaggeration, a misunderstanding, but the principal was firm. This wasn't the first time a student had come forward about feeling unfairly treated by Ms. Williams. Alicia's bravery in speaking out had opened the door, and now the administration had to address what had been ignored for far too long. During the disciplinary meeting, Ms. Williams was questioned about her behavior, her grading practices, and her interactions with students. The administration asked her to provide explanations for the patterns they had noticed in her grading, patterns that clearly showed favoritism towards some students and harsher standards for others. Ms. Williams, who had always believed herself untouchable, suddenly found herself under a scrutiny she had never anticipated. Her usual confident tone was gone, replaced by a defensive, uncertain voice as she tried to justify her actions. But the evidence, much of it collected by Alicia, was undeniable. In the days following Alicia's brave stand, several students came forward, inspired by Alicia's courage. They shared their own experiences with Ms. Williams, describing instances where they too had felt belittled, dismissed, or treated unfairly. Each story painted a similar picture of a teacher who used her authority not to help her students grow, but to control and belittle those she didn't deem worthy of her respect. These testimonies only added to the weight of evidence against Ms. Williams, and it became clear to the administration that action was needed. The school sent out a notice to the parents, explaining that an investigation was underway and reassuring them that the school was committed to providing a fair and respectful environment for all students. Many parents were relieved, grateful that the school was taking steps to address what had been a hidden issue for so long. Some parents even reached out to Alicia's family, expressing their admiration for Alicia's courage and thanking her for helping to bring the issue to light. A few days later, the school held a special assembly. The principal stood before the students, addressing them with a solemn yet hopeful tone. "This school is a place for learning, for growth, and for respect," she began, "and we want every student to feel valued and supported. Sometimes it takes courage to bring issues to light, and we are grateful to those who have spoken up to help us improve. We are committed to making sure that every student here has a voice and that their voice is heard." The students sat quietly, absorbing the principal's words. Many of them glanced at Alicia, who was sitting in her usual seat, but this time she didn't feel small or invisible. She felt a sense of pride, knowing that her actions had led to this moment, a moment that would make a difference for everyone in the school. The principal continued, addressing the issue more directly. We are taking steps to ensure that every classroom here is a safe and respectful environment. If anyone feels they are not being treated fairly, please know that you can come to us. We are here to listen, to support, and to make things right. The students listened closely, feeling a newfound trust in their school, a sense that their voices truly mattered. As for Ms. Williams, the consequences were swift and unavoidable. She was placed on a disciplinary review, meaning she would not be allowed to teach until the investigation was complete. The administration went through her records, examining each grade, each comment, each incident where a student had felt mistreated. They spoke with students, both past and present, gathering stories and evidence that painted a clearer picture of her actions over the years. Eventually, the administration decided that Ms. Williams would not return to teaching at the school. The pattern of favoritism, unfair grading, and demeaning behavior was too clear to ignore, and the administration knew that allowing her to continue would only harm more students in the future. Ms. Williams was given the option to resign quietly, which she accepted, and within a few weeks, she was no longer a part of the school. The news of Ms. Williams' departure brought a sense of relief to many students and their families. Some felt a sense of justice, others a newfound sense of hope that they would now be treated with fairness and respect. Alicia, though quiet and humble as always, felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced something difficult, something that had once made her feel small and powerless, and she had come out stronger on the other side. In the weeks that followed, Alicia noticed a change in the way her classmates treated her. No longer was she just the quiet girl in the middle row. People looked at her with admiration, some even with gratitude. Her classmates began to greet her in the hallways, offering warm smiles and words of support. Some thanked her directly, saying things like, "You're really brave, Alicia," or "You made a big difference for all of us." Alicia, who had once felt overlooked and underestimated, now felt seen in a way she never had before. Her quiet courage had earned her the respect of her classmates, and she carried herself with a new confidence, knowing that she had made a real difference. She had stood up not just for herself, but for all the students who had been mistreated, showing them that even the smallest voice could be powerful when it spoke the truth. Teachers, too, began to look at Alicia differently. They saw her as more than just a student. They saw her as a young leader, someone who had reminded them of the importance of respect and fairness in the classroom. Some teachers even approached her after class, offering quiet words of praise and acknowledging the strength it took to do what she had done. One teacher, Mr. Reynolds, approached her one afternoon as she was gathering her books. "Alicia," he said, his tone kind and respectful, "I just wanted to say that I admire what you did. You reminded all of us what it means to truly support our students. Thank you for having the courage to speak up." Alicia nodded, smiling softly. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a feeling of belonging, of being valued not just for her work, but for who she was. The school administration also took steps to ensure that something like this would not happen again. They introduced new guidelines for grading, emphasizing fairness and respect in teacher-student interactions. They set up regular meetings where students could share their concerns openly, knowing that their voices would be heard. Alicia's actions had sparked a change, one that would benefit every student who walked through the school's doors in the years to come. As the weeks turned into months, Alicia continued to focus on her studies, but she did so with a newfound sense of purpose. She no longer felt like she had to prove herself to anyone. She knew her own worth, and she knew that she was capable of achieving great things. Her classmates continued to look up to her, often seeking her advice or support when they faced their own challenges. Alicia had become a quiet leader, someone others looked to with respect and admiration. One day during a school assembly, the principal took a moment to recognize Alicia's contribution to the school. She called Alicia up to the stage, her voice filled with pride as she introduced her. "Today, we want to honor a student who has shown extraordinary courage and integrity. the principal said, her eyes shining as she looked at Alicia. Alicia reminded us all of the importance of fairness, respect, and standing up for what is right. We are grateful for her leadership and her bravery. The students and teachers in the audience erupted into applause, their cheers filling the auditorium. Alicia stood on the stage, her heart pounding with pride and gratitude. She looked out at the sea of faces, seeing friends, classmates, and teachers who had all come together to support her. She realized, in that moment, that her journey had not just been about standing up to Ms. Williams. It had been about discovering her own strength, her own voice, and the impact she could have on the world around her. As Alicia walked off the stage, her friends gathered around her, offering hugs and congratulations. She felt a warmth in her heart, a sense of belonging and purpose that she had never known before. She had earned the respect of her classmates, her teachers, and herself. And as she looked around at the smiling faces, Alicia knew that she would carry this strength with her for the rest of her life. She had proven that even the quietest person could make a powerful difference, and she knew that she would always stand up for what was right, no matter where her journey took her. Alicia's story reminds us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes, courage is found in quiet moments, in the calm determination to stand firm in the face of unfairness. It is in the steady gaze of someone who refuses to back down, who knows their worth and believes in what is right, even when it feels like the world is against them. Alicia's journey was not easy, and there were times when the weight of Ms. Williams' harsh words could have broken her spirit. But she chose a different path. She chose to rise above, to let her resilience shine, and to show others that even the smallest voice can make a powerful difference. In every school, every classroom, and every place where people come together, there are those who feel overlooked, those who feel as if they don't belong or aren't valued. Alicia was once one of those people. She was the quiet student in the middle row, the one who did her work, stayed silent, and avoided attention. But inside, Alicia held a strength that no one could see. She held on to her dreams, her sense of self, and the belief that she deserved respect, just like anyone else. When the time came, she didn't hesitate to speak up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly. Courage does not always mean raising your voice. Sometimes, it is the decision to keep going when things get hard, to hold your head high when others try to bring you down, and to remember that your value is not defined by others' opinions. Alicia's courage was not in shouting or fighting back with anger. Her courage was in her quiet resolve, her patience, and her determination to stay true to herself. One teacher, Mr. Reynolds, approached her one afternoon as she was gathering her books. "Alicia," he said, his tone kind and respectful, "I just wanted to say that I admire what you did. You reminded all of us what it means to truly support our students. Thank you for having the courage to speak up." Alicia nodded, smiling softly. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a feeling of belonging, of being valued not just for her work, but for who she was. The school administration also took steps to ensure that something like this would not happen again. They introduced new guidelines for grading, emphasizing fairness and respect in teacher-student interactions. They set up regular meetings where students could share their concerns openly, knowing that their voices would be heard. Alicia's actions had sparked a change, one that would benefit every student who walked through the school's doors in the years to come. As the weeks turned into months, Alicia continued to focus on her studies, but she did so with a newfound sense of purpose. She no longer felt like she had to prove herself to anyone. She knew her own worth, and she knew that she was capable of achieving great things. Her classmates continued to look up to her, often seeking her advice or support when they faced their own challenges. Alicia had become a quiet leader, someone others looked to with respect and admiration. One day, during a school assembly, the principal took a moment to recognize Alicia's contribution to the school. She called Alicia up to the stage, her voice filled with pride as she introduced her. "Today, we want to honor a student who has shown extraordinary courage and integrity," the principal said, her eyes shining as she looked at Alicia. Alicia reminded us all of the importance of fairness, respect, and standing up for what is right. We are grateful for her leadership and her bravery. The students and teachers in the audience erupted into applause, their cheers filling the auditorium. Alicia stood on the stage, her heart pounding with pride and gratitude. She looked out at the sea of faces, seeing friends, classmates, and teachers who had all come together to support her. She realized, in that moment, that her journey had not just been about standing up to Ms. Williams. It had been about discovering her own strength, her own voice, and the impact she could have on the world around her. As Alicia walked off the stage, her friends gathered around her, offering hugs and congratulations. She felt a warmth in her heart, a sense of belonging and purpose that she had never known before. She had earned the respect of her classmates, her teachers, and herself. And as she looked around at the smiling faces, Alicia knew that she would carry this strength with her for the rest of her life. She had proven that even the quietest person could make a powerful difference, and she knew that she would always stand up for what was right, no matter where her journey took her. Alicia's story reminds us that courage is not always loud. Sometimes, courage is found in quiet moments, in the calm determination to stand firm in the face of unfairness. It is in the steady gaze of someone who refuses to back down, who knows their worth and believes in what is right, even when it feels like the world is against them. Alicia's journey was not easy, and there were times when the weight of Ms. Williams' harsh words could have broken her spirit. But she chose a different path. She chose to rise above, to let her resilience shine, and to show others that even the smallest voice can make a powerful difference. In every school, every classroom, and every place where people come together, there are those who feel overlooked, those who feel as if they don't belong or aren't valued. Alicia was once one of those people. She was the quiet student in the middle row, the one who did her work, stayed silent, and avoided attention. But inside, Alicia held a strength that no one could see. She held on to her dreams, her sense of self, and the belief that she deserved respect, just like anyone else. When the time came, she didn't hesitate to speak up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been treated unfairly. Courage does not always mean raising your voice. Sometimes, it is the decision to keep going when things get hard, to hold your head high when others try to bring you down, and to remember that your value is not defined by others' opinions. Alicia's courage was not in shouting or fighting back with anger. Her courage was in her quiet resolve, her patience, and her determination to stay true to herself.